followed her. I want to think about some of the things that Madam C.J. Walker were talking about at the time. She was saying, one, there's a misnomer that she was only concerned about straightening hair. She said, absolutely not. She said, I deplore the idea that someone would have the impression that I was only thinking about straightening hair. What I was concerned about is making people have healthy hair. And she thought that she saw herself as a hair culturalist. So when she's dealt with clients, she was concerned about what is it that's going to make African-American women not only have healthy hair, but also feel great about themselves. And then we got to the 50s. Long time between Madam C.J. Walker's experience and what happened in 1950 when Johnson Products started, 1954. I was only a kid. I was 4 years old in 1954 when George Johnson decided to start a company. Now, I want to just kind of lay the foundation a little bit about what it really takes to think about having a hair care company. One thing, first of all, Madam C.J. Walker, George Johnson, they were opening the door into what I call the economic freedom that we're all looking for. They were opening the door because they had never done this before. They were creating recipes for not only hair care products, but for excellence. Secondly, this was a market that had never been tapped. Remember, all the hair care products that had been developed up until this point were for white women. So to go into your basement or to sit down with a recipe and try to figure out something that would work was phenomenal. Initially, with the Johnson products, they created a product for men. And as many of you can remember, you saw men were wearing their hair slicked back, especially entertainers back in the day. And then they realized 3 years later that they needed to create a product for women. This was 1954. The women's product was launched in 1957. But they had a challenge, and you'll hear this challenge across the board, not just in 54, 57, but in today's world, they had problems getting money. So George went to a bank and he asked the banker, I need to borrow $250. They said, oh, absolutely not. He said, I want to start a business. Oh, absolutely not. It's too risky. So he said, thank you to the banker. He went to another branch and he told that branch manager, I'd like to borrow $250 to take my family on vacation. And I said, oh, absolutely. Where do you can sign right here. Can you imagine that having a business is too risky, but taking your family on a vacation is something they approved of? So he took the $250 and started Johnson Products. It's an amazing how that process works in the mindset of people at that particular time in history. Remember now, we hadn't even gone into Brown versus Board of Education around that time. We were still new in terms of integrating schools. So to be able to get $250 for a business was totally unheard of. So what happened was, in 1976, they decided that they would create the Afro Sheen products. They are one of the few companies that ended up taking their business to the American stock market. Almost unheard of. Totally unheard of when you really think about it. So we're talking about a company that went from 1954 up until the 70s when they decided to start actually what they were 80% of the hair relaxer market in the country. Now, I started thinking about myself. I've never had a relaxer, never wanted a relaxer. No one in my family has a relaxer. And so there I was thinking to myself, I'm a little girl in 1954. My mom had my hair in two little pigtails, and I'm going to school, and she never thought about a relaxer. But that is what made most of their money, the Johnsons, most of their money was in the 50s and then going on into the 60s and the 70s. So you heard about Afro Sheen. That became very big. That became big because Michael Jackson and crew were starting to think about, hair. How that falls is very interesting. We got down to the Johnsons. What happened, I hate to go through all the story because it was a very interesting family dynamic. Mrs. Johnson decided to divorce her husband. And in doing so, she decided to sell the business in that process. And so in doing so, he was very upset about the fact that you would take a business that I developed from scratch, that I had to go beg to get $250 to start this business and sell it to another company. And she did. She sold the company, and as a part of that divorce decree, she owned that company. What happened was, a few years later, she came back and remarried Mr. Johnson, and they continued to run the company for quite a while after that. Interesting. And might I add that, they had a beautiful relationship. But then the 70s came, 1964 came, and then you heard of Soft Sheen. And that was Mr. Gardner and his wife. They decided that they wanted to try a product that was also just for us. And they went in the basement and started mixing up products. They were not chemists. He was an educator. She managed the books, and they started the Soft Sheen Company. The Soft Sheen Company initially was made just for scalp conditioning and also to create a setting solution so women didn't have to, put rollers in their hair. Now, let me tell you about the roller situation. I met Nancy Wilson back when I was a freshman in college in 1968. And she said, no man wants to get up in the next morning and see a woman with rollers in her hair. So seems like Soft Sheen was onto something because they were able to make something called Miss Cool, which would put the setting lotion on your hair, and in 5 minutes, your hair was curled. No more rollers. After a while, they decided that they would create a company called Carefree Curl, which was a quick relaxer. Rather than having to sit for 12 hours to have, 8 hours to have your hair processed as a relaxer, now they've created a product that would last 2 hours. So this is the deal. 1964, they started the company. In 1979, they made $500,000. Now hold your seats. 3 years later, the company made $55 million. 3 years, going from $500,000 to $55 million. And in addition to being in the domestic market, they also went into the international market. And then they decided to come up with a relaxer kit, which was called Optimum Care in the 80s. And that helped to straighten and condition your hair at the same time. And before you knew it, the Jerry curl was out. The Jerry curl came out 7 years later, and they increased their amount by $30 more million. And now they're up to $87.2 million by 1989. Now, Michael Jackson and crew were wearing the Jerry curl with all that dripping and juice and all the other things that made a Jerry curl, but they were making money hand over fist. What was happening was the company was growing too fast. And they started to wonder whether they were going to be able to keep up with the growth process. Now, when you grow that fast, you start to question, how am I going to be able to stay in the marketplace, and how am I going to be able to do things? So what they did was they reduced their employment team by 27%, and that was between 1984 and 1988, and they never replaced the people they got rid of. So the growth process slowed down by 3%. Now, are you paying attention? Because I started to ask myself that question. When you see some changes happening and you're not quite ready for them, then you need to pay attention. They went into the foreign market. They went into Europe. They went to Africa in 1987, and they expected that 440 million people would jump on board with the Jerry curl, but it wasn't quite that way. People weren't as excited about it over there as they were about it over here. They bought another company even to think that the growth would increase, but it just didn't happen. Then what happened was the big boys decided they wanted to come into the marketplace. I'm talking about the competition started to show up with large companies. because they had the distribution networks. They knew the game. They had created the game, as a matter of fact. So here we are, Mr. Johnson earlier on. Now we've got Mr. Gardner and with the soft sheen products, and things were just moving a little bit faster than they could control. So by 1995, they were making $94 million. You know, Mr. Gardner and his wife were getting a little older. They had a 27-year-old son. So he decided to take over the company and run things. I'm not sure whether he had a degree as an MBA. I'm not sure what his background was, but he had grown up in the hair care business. So we assumed that things were going to run pretty smoothly. Well, guess what? They didn't. And he ended up resigning. His wife was also vice president of marketing. Her name was Denise. His sister was also running, had run a part of the business. She was executive vice president of advertising. And when he decided to resign, his name was Gary, then the sister took over. So there she was, an advertising executive, smart as a whip, but she decided to make some major changes. So what she did was, which was a good business decision in my account, she got rid of 40 products that were not making any money. She said, why keep those around if they're not, if it's not going to be profitable? She got rid of 40 products. She went back and looked at their warehouse operations, increased that, which was a great idea. She increased that process so people could get their products quicker. And then finally in 1996, they made her full-time CEO. She came out with the Mizani product, which I've used myself. The next year, in 1997, she started making sure that that product was in salons. And then they came out with a young product. And I'm sure some of you that are watching are the 20 and 30 somethings. So they were trying to figure out, what do we do in terms of tapping into a young market? And they created a product called Alternatives. It was amazing. 1997, they were making $94.5 million. But guess what? Someone approached them and said, had you thought about selling? They started to look at what they were doing and wondered whether somebody could do it better than they could do it. So in 1998, they sold the company to L'Oreal for $160 million. I don't know whether that was a good idea, but they sold it for $160 million. And time goes by. We're talking about between 1998 and then in the middle of that process, Carol's daughter shows up in 1993. Carol was going to her kitchen, creating her own little recipes, trying to create some things. And her name was Lisa Price. She named the company after her mom, Carol. And they were on to something. She had been selling the product at flea markets and craft shows. And then in 1999, she decided to open her boutique store in Brooklyn, in Fort Greene. You know, technology's coming about. So 2000, there's e-commerce. She gets Jada and Pinkett Smith and her husband Will, along with Jay-Z. They put $10 million into the business. They tap in a relationship with Mary J. Blige. She comes out with a perfume. They sold more of that perfume on HSN than any product had ever been sold. So you were thinking they're rocking and rolling. Hey, we're doing well. We got hair care products. We got a perfume for men, might I add, that what they will also get into that party. But something happened. I did a little bit of research and I was wondering, well, who was running the company? All the research indicates that Lisa was not running the company. She had hired a guy named Steve Stout. Steve became the CEO, but he came out of the music industry and he started to run things. Had an impressive background. He'd gotten, inducted into the Hall of Fame for advertising, and a variety of things started to show up that kind of gave them an edge on terms of doing better. They opened up numerous retail stores. But by 2014, they were in Target. They were in a lot of stores. I mean, I'm sure you went to Walgreens, Walmart, you saw them everywhere. But in 2014, they closed 5 of the 7 retail stores. They were also in Harlem. I remember going to Harlem to their store, lovely store. They ended up laying off 29 of the 42 employees. Something was happening in terms of this market in 2014. Now, I just indicated they started the business in 93. By 2014, they're bankrupt. What can I say? They filed bankruptcy. And there they were having to close the store. Now, when you got a good thing, somebody does recognize the good thing. So L'Oreal bought them too. Now, when L'Oreal bought them, it wasn't like Lisa went home and packed her bags and say, I'm not going to be involved. She still has been involved all these years. She's also mentoring young people who are interested in being hair care, starting their own hair care business. But then you start to say to yourself, what else is going on out here that's making things change? In 2007, and I've talked to myself, okay, they say the natural hair care movement started. Well, I started wearing my hair natural in 1968. So something is wrong with that math. Even though it was only my roommate, another friend, and I were the only students on campus that had afros in 1968. The Black Power movement was big. Women were wearing afros. Angela Davis was a big spokesperson unofficially, for wearing the afro. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what could have happened economically that would not make people want to buy Carol's Daughter's products. Everybody's wearing their hair natural. I mean, yes, there are some people that are still wearing their hair in a perm. The jerry curl is becoming passé, and people are wanting to look fabulous. I'm Black and I'm proud, but something happened where they sold the business to L'Oreal. So do you see where I'm going with this? We were starting to, as a society, starting to say the chemicals are no good. What people were using to put in their hair for relaxers, jerry curls, those were chemicals. Society was becoming more of a society around organic and natural products. How do we eat better, look better, feel better naturally and organically? And that's what happened was the products started to become bigger and better, and people had more access to them because of e-commerce with Carol's Daughter. They had the retail store, so you're wondering really what did happen. In addition to the fact that Carol had spent a time over those years educating herself, becoming more knowledgeable about what kinds of hair that we needed to think about creating products for. It was word of mouth. If you picked up Essence magazine or you with girlfriends out for lunch, you're talking about Carol's Daughter, Carol's Daughter, Carol's Daughter, and you can find the products at Target and all the big stores. But something happened where we were talking about multicultural hair brands, and then you start seeing more competition. I've used Miss Jessie's. Miss Jessie's product came into the marketplace. You could, the expression, you pay for what you get. People did not mind paying $60 for the curly pudding that Miss Jessie was making because it was addressing their needs. And then all of a sudden, you saw people wearing locks and twist and cornrows, and they wanted to go a natural route. They were not interested in chemicals. So it made it a very exciting time for what life is. We could say life became very different. In today's world, in recent years, you had people like Tracy Ellis Ross, who was saying, you know what? I don't need anybody else to run my company. I don't need to go borrow money from other people. She's got it kind of like that in terms of finances. So she's using her own funds and she's running her own business. And one of the reasons why she decided to even start a company, because she had gone through traumatic years of her mother trying to press her hair or not even press it. I read an article that said her mother even put an iron on her hair with a towel on it so she could make her hair straight. I came up with, I was thinking about, what is it about having straight hair that's so enticing? And I said to myself, okay, I'm good enough. I have self-confidence. I'm fabulous. I'm great. I'm happy. Why do I have to have straight hair in order to be all that in a bag of chips? So Tracy said, I don't have to be all that in a bag of chips because I have straight hair. So I will create my own product. And she created Pattern Beauty, because there are all different type of textures and patterns that we have as African American or just people of color. Our Latin American sisters have all different types of texture. So here we are. She's a sole owner. She's a sole manager. Social media has come to play. She is now showing visual self-care videos on how to take care of your hair. She's now got products with all different kinds of hair patterns, no matter what your density may be. If you need more of this, we got a product for that. If you need a little less of that, we got a product for that. So she is now doing her own thing. She started to help us expand our definition of words. I wasn't familiar with it because you could see my hair is very short, but I started to read about, they've got the different levels, a 3A and a so-and-so D, and depending on the texture of your hair and the curl of your hair, these became new vocabulary words for us. Now, in 2021, Nielsen said that Black consumers were 85% of the American hair care and beauty market. Could you imagine that? 85%, because we like being pretty. We like looking great. We like showing up correct. That was an interesting thing as I was reading about Madam C.J. Walker, and she said, they were saying when she walked into a room, she didn't even have to say anything. Her presence preceded her. She looked so amazing. She was so pulled together. And so that's what's happening with the hair care market. But many of you are familiar with Shea Moisture. They got bought by Unilever. Cantor got bought by Unilever. Carol's Daughter, I just said, got bought by L'Oreal. And so the idea of, I don't need my hair pressed, I don't need my hair relaxed, I don't need my hair texturized, is still on the back burner, but there's something that's making people decide that they need some help and they're selling their businesses. Now, there are another group of people that are like Tracy. For example, Gabrielle Union, she said, you know what, I had some problems myself with my hair. I'm gonna create my own product. So she created, as you were familiar with the expression, for us, by us, FUBU. And she started to look at what do we need to develop a product around regrowth or repairing our hair. I thought about that myself. I've thought all those years, and as you know, in recent years, there have been some legislative language that's been saying that having perms is affecting our little brains because of all the chemicals that have been used all over the years. And so they're trying to cut that out. And so Gabrielle said, not only am I going to create a product, I'm going to go develop and help move forward that Buy Black movement. As you well know, when Mr. Floyd got killed, everybody jumped on the Buy Black movement because no one felt as though they were doing enough in terms of the mainstream, whether it's hair care, across the board. And so what Gabrielle did was also create something called Lift as Well Climb. And what that consisted of, she went to HBCUs and found scientists and found chemists to hire to help make her product. I thought that was amazing. She said, because you know what we've got is just much talent and skill as the other folks out here in the world, we can create our own product. And that's exactly what she did. So now her product is being done by HBCU scientists and chemists. And she's trying to move that initiative forward. She also said, and I have a quote here, for me, it's utilizing the talents from our own community. This may be my own quote. It has nothing to do with utilizing talents from other folks' community when we know we are committed to making our community better, not only physically, culturally, scientifically, but we need to address the issues that impact our community, and race has nothing to do with it. Now, recently, I'm sure you saw the article about the sister that sold her business. It was in the New York Times a few months ago. The company was called Myel. As a matter of fact, when I read the article about Myel, it was created by Monique Rodriguez and her husband. And Monique had been a nurse, and she had been messing around with this formula for about 10 years. And she decided to create a formula that would really address our hair. And they held that company for about 10 years, actually about 9 years. And they recently sold the company to Procter & Gamble. Well, there was a young sister up in New Hampshire who got a little concerned because one of the influencers a white woman, had written an article about using this particular product because this product helped her make her hair grow. And in doing so, she had millions and millions and millions of followers. And when she started writing about this product, that meant that other people started buying the product too. And I'm talking about the white community. She says, you know, I'm up here in New Hampshire. I can barely find the product on a good day because a lot of the stores don't carry it. But when the influencer posted this information online, her name was Alex Earl. She was a big influencer. The growth of the product went out the roof. People were buying the product, and this young woman said, I can't find it. This product was made for us. But Monique said, the product is made for anybody who needs the product. I'm not just going to narrow it down just to say only Black people can buy the product. And as you well know, commerce, which is the reason I came up with this workshop called the Capitalization of Hair, is because money is money. But as I started to put this particular speech together, I asked myself, let me think back to Madam C.J. Walker. Let me think back to Mr. Gardner. Let me think back to Mr. Johnson. And like I said, in Johnson's case and in Mr. Gardner's case, those were couples that were there fighting the fight together. What was the reason for them starting the businesses? Was it about, I said there could be one of three ways. Did you start the business because you had a vision that you wanted to make society better in terms of actually a hair care need? Did you have a vision saying, I want to make a lot of money? Or was your vision saying, let me see how I can impact society and let me start the business? A good question for us to think about as we move forward in society in terms of creating business. What is our mission? When I started to read about Mr. Gardner, and might I add, you know, some of these elders have just passed this year. The Gardners were, and I started researching, trying to say, well, what are some of these other business owners doing in their community? Mr. Gardner did a couple of things, and I call it lessons from the elders. One of the things that company did, Soft Sheen, and they were based in Chicago, as the Johnson Products was based in Chicago as well. They raised money to get Harold Washington, elected as mayor in Chicago. That was one of the things they did. And what they did was, in terms of the money, was to get people registered to vote. They raised over $300,000 to do that. They also they helped to put money in a theater in the Black community. They also ended up, Mr. Gardner led 1,000 people in a march back in 2012 because Black people were not getting hired at a construction company in Chicago. He also came up with you heard the Black love, Black on Black love. That was something that his company created. So in addition to all those things, and as much as we love Michael Jordan in basketball, he was a co-owner of the Chicago Bulls. Not only that, very active in his local urban league. I don't read a lot about people that are multi-million-dollar business owners being as active in the community as they could. Now, that's just me. And I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of looking. So I asked the question, what makes a great great? Is it about the money? Is it about making an impact on society? Is it about having a vision about, in these particular cases, creating a vision and starting something that no one had ever done before, including in the case of Madam C.J. Walker, she had worked for somebody before she started her business, but still she became the first Black female millionaire. So I'd like us to ask ourselves a couple of questions. And if you're thinking about a business, these may be some things that you want to think about. One, what is your vision? Two, do you have knowledge to create a business that it will be successful? And what I mean by that is we have to do our due diligence in terms of understanding what the process is in terms of creating businesses. We just can't have an idea and I call up Betty and Robert and James and say, hey, I'm gonna start a business, and I know nothing about business and I know nothing about that industry. Third thing is we need to be very, very strategic about how we want to implement that business. I'm a big believer is I know a lot, but what I don't know, I know people that do know it. So you have to be very resourceful. There should be a database that you can pick up the phone and call any number of people and say, I want to do this, can you help me? And never be afraid to ask for help. And fourth, that support system, family, friends, people in the industry need to be there to help you and support you. That's how you become successful in the world. So I say, is the greatest good for the greatest number, or is it all about me? Let's think about that. Let's think about how we're going to move forward in terms of this movement of women, of sisters, of brothers who support us, in terms of how we look, how we see the world, and the impact that we will have on it. It's been a great opportunity to sit today and talk with you guys. I don't know if there are any questions, but I was told I had 4 minutes and my time virtually is up.
Thank you. Thank you, Ayanna. Does anybody we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions? Does anybody have any questions for Ayanna? Oh, Susan?
Thank you. Just very quickly, your note about the products that people were complaining were being used by white people and so forth. I think it just went out of my head. Oh, let me move on to something else. I'm sorry, whatever I was going to say just went out of my head. But white people do use straightening products, including relaxers, and they always have. And the image you gave of Tracy Ellis Ross having her hair literally ironed reminds me of a scene in the film The Way They Were, where Barbara Streisand lays her hair on an ironing board and irons her hair. Then I want to mention something that came from the previous session I attended. Someone made reference to the large amount of natural hair or natural leases on the web. And if you say that this new kind of movement of natural hair started in 1997, there's also
no. They said that the natural hair movement actually started in 2007, and that's what I said. It was shocking to me because I started wearing my hair natural in 1968, and then the years. But you know what happens, my sister, is young people. It's many times, as brilliant as they are, and they could be my daughters, and I'm so proud of when I read about one of them in their 40s, I'm saying that could be my child. But a lot of times they think nothing is new. When I started to do the research, even some of the herbs that are put in products were used in Egypt thousands and thousands of years ago. So we're not doing anything new when we're talking about natural and organic. It's just being given a new name, a new posture, a new way of seeing it to a whole different group of people that never did it before.
Right. I'm sorry to mix the date, but the explosion of young Black women online promoting natural hair lifestyles and all of that seemed to be pushed by commercial efforts. There were a lot of commercial efforts backing those women, and it was a positive thing to promote natural hair. But there was also this element of, I want to retexturize my hair. I need length if it's going to be natural. So I think there were 2 different paths that people were taking, or 2 different messages that were diametrically opposed. I want to be natural, but only if I could have, long, curly, biracial hair.
But you remember we went through that phase when people started wearing their hair in braids, and they were wearing the fake hair. People were putting an artificial hair in their hair, and it had to be down to their waist almost. I didn't understand that process because I guess I don't come from that generation of people where I thought that. I mean, I'm 72 years old, and everybody that I knew that was wearing their hair natural was wearing their own hair natural. And so now we also, and I didn't even talk about the whole hair care market where people are wearing the lace weaves, and that's a whole nother conversation for another time, because a lot of women are doing that, and that's a whole nother market where a lot of money is being made, but it's not being made in our community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're at time. Thank you, Ayanna, so much for that talk. And for those of you who are waiting for the replays will be up in about 2 weeks on the conference website. And I would like to invite you all to join us for our final day tomorrow. And our sessions start at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. So there's a workshop How African American hair and beauty and art can invoke trauma and joy. So Bettina Bird-Giles, who is here in attendance, will be doing that workshop. Ayanna, thank you very, very much. Please do go to her speaker page and read the rest of her bio, because she has done a lot.
Well, I just want to make an
so
impact
much,
no matter where
everyone.
I am.
And everyone, please have a good night. Refresh yourselves and see you tomorrow.
Job well done, my sisters.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Great talk.
Thank you so much.